Well, hello and welcome to the Church Office podcast. My name is Gavin Smith, and it's a joy to welcome you today to this Admin and Ops and Church Administration podcast. We love talking about the work of ministry behind the scenes. Happy New Year to you. If you picked up the podcast, then 2025, and I have a special guest. Pete Greasley is on today. Pete, thanks for joining us, mate.
A pleasure sitting here in front of all my books. These are all mine.
I know, in the library at Christchurch.
Yes.
It's great, and big thank you to Zach for putting this stuff together and serving us so well. Before we get into our conversation, I need to do a shout out to Church Suite, our sponsors of the podcast, and a big thank you to Gavin and the team at Church Suite for sponsoring the podcast and encouraging us and working with us. This is a great piece of software that will help you to run your church in an effective way behind the scenes. Communication, a good church database, there's rotas, there's small groups, there's a whole range of things that this stuff does. We've used it for a number of years and it is brilliant. So let me encourage you to have a look at it and check it out. Pete, we're chatting today. You've really approached me for this topic, haven't you? Because as you've interacted with leaders, we're going to talk a little bit today about kind of financing and supporting pastors in their salaries and in their pensions and various other things. Fill us in a little bit about your kind of experience with leaders. What are some of the conversations and challenges you're seeing out there?
I think it's particularly evident within independent churches.
Yeah.
And, whether it's some Baptists, would all be independent, but other independent churches that are not necessarily structured into a denomination with things set up.
Yeah.
What we've had in the past, which we can talk about later, but also what I encounter as I'm spending more and more time trying to serve other pastors and other churches, is people are sticking their finger in the air, wondering how much should I get paid?
Yeah.
How much should we pay this person? What should it look like?
Yeah.
It depends on the trustees or the elders or the deacons. It can be very subjective.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing so many men stepping out of ministry or just moving every few years.
Yeah.
I think there's two main reasons for that. The first reason is a lack of care. And I'm not sure that can come from within the church. I think that probably has to come from outside somehow, even though you're an independent church. But the other thing is, guys are looking down the road or looking at what they have now financially and just thinking, this is untenable, but don't know how to broach it. It causes a sense of, I don't know where to go with this or what to say about this, or am I asking too much or asking too little, or should I even ask at all? So sometimes men are just saying, you know what, I can't live in this for the security of my wife and my kids if they've got a family. So trying to move it from the subjective sense of it depends who the trustees are, for instance, to something far more objective, so that when a church is looking to take on a pastor or pastors, they have something far more objective that they can go to, just like a school would. This is how much we pay our staff, this is how much we pay so-and-so, this is what it looks like. So we're able to look at our budget and determine whether we're able to do that, rather than cutting corners and saying, well, we've got a little bit of money, I'm sure we could grab somebody for that. But that person then ends up not in a good situation.
Yeah. It's so true, isn't it? There are lots of challenges. And when we spoke to Matt Waldock, who's doing the gospel coaching, his experience is exactly the same. People are leaving.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of underlying anxiety that of like, am I going to be okay in the future? That it's awkward to ask for reviews when you get to, once you've got a set kind of salary, nobody is thinking about this. And that is a lack of care, isn't it, in a way?
It is. I spoke to somebody just Sunday
really?
Who was visiting us, a chap and his wife who I've known for many years. And I said, "Oh, you're still pastoring in this place?" He said, "I've been out of it for years. I'm back into teaching."
Really?
I said, "Why?" He said, "I just couldn't take it." These were some of the issues that arose.
Yeah. So let's chat about some of the specific challenges. You talk in there a little bit about it depends on your trustees. So an individual pastor can't set their own salary, can they? That's just, if the people are doing that, then it is crazy and it is almost kind of dangerous in that way. But so how do you start this then? So you've started a church, you're the single pastor running this thing. how on earth do you make a start on this? Because there are challenges in there, isn't it, of who you pull in for trustees.
Yeah.
There could be some underlying motivations as well of who you select.
Indeed.
Tell us a bit about that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the challenge. So the trustees ultimately
Yeah.
are responsible for determining the salary
Yeah.
of anybody full-time or part-time. And so, therefore, if you are wanting trustees or you're looking to change trustees, the temptation is to get trustees that may be in business,
Yeah.
that earn a lot more. So, because their perspective would be, well, 25,000 is not enough. You should be on 50,000. You may have somebody who hasn't been in work for 20 years, and he would say 25,000 is a ridiculous amount of money. We should be on 12. So you can't help but think, oh my gracious, I've got to make sure that the trustees that we take on board, they may not be the best ones, but they're earning a decent amount of money so that they can appreciate and look at what I'm doing in the round. Now, the problem is, therefore, you're leaving it down to the subjective sense or the experience of each individual trustee, rather than putting something together that is far more objective, like we talk about in schools, that this is appropriate, this is right, and therefore you can take trustees that you're not looking at how will they compensate me. You're looking at, can they do a good job as a trustee? So that's a big issue.
Yeah. The two things, and there can be a temptation to set that up to make that work for you. Because there's this underlying anxiety that goes, right, I don't know how I'm going to be looked after. I don't know what I'm going to get for the future. But like you say, if you go into teaching, there is a objective teaching
or
pay
the
scale,
NHS or
all
working
these kind of
anywhere
things.
within the civil service. Or if my son's an architect, he's moved jobs a number of times. Which is what they do, I'm told. It scares me to death. But he's gone to different companies because they offer him more and it's a better package, and it may be the kind of work that he wants to work on. As a pastor who's faithfully trying to serve a flock, nobody wants to be on that bandwagon of I can earn more money down the road, or it's not a career. It's a calling, and it's not just a calling individually; it's a calling to a people. And so, the pastor doesn't have, if he's being faithful, he doesn't have the ability that my son has, where he can just say, well, better down the road, I'll go there. And then 2 years' time, this company's offering this. This is a big project. I'll go and do that. He's saying, no, I'm given to these people. So therefore, we need to consider that he is bound in some ways. And so he needs to be cared for so that he doesn't feel used in the wrong way.
Yeah, absolutely right. And then there's some other things to take into consideration there as well, isn't there, in terms of pension, in terms of how we look after him. And, churches are just generally no good at this.
To be fair here, I think it's only the last 10 years, we even considered, legally we didn't need to, things have changed now, but we didn't even consider it. So I've been in ministry 40 years. It's only the last decade that I've been able to really put some money aside for pension. It's not enough, but it's the best I can do, because one of the trustees just said, hang on a minute here. Something needs to be put in place here. So that's a massive challenge. Now, if you work for the civil service, I think the civil service contribution is now, this year, I think it's 28.7%.
Which is wild, isn't it? It is wild.
But it's interesting where a church, so you might have trustees and 3 of them work for the civil service, and the civil service are putting 28.37% into their pension. And legally, you only have to put 3% in. And so, we'll give them 4%.
We'll be generous. Do the 4.
Just like we'll push it up 1. So those thinking about the future, then we hit the issue of manses. Which is another challenge, because I've been involved with churches that have got a manse. So, for instance, they may consider, well, we should be paying, say, £40,000, for instance, for this pastor. But the manse, because it's a big house and it's lovely and we own it and we've had it decades, if not 100 years, the manse will cost you £20,000 rent and that kind of thing. So we'll just pay you 20.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is, the church is therefore has made a huge amount of money and capital on that house.
Property, yeah.
But the guy hasn't.
Yeah.
So if I had my way, and I have advised this, is if you have a manse, don't bring that in, give it as a peppercorn rent. Don't bring that into the salary you're thinking about for the pastor.
Yeah.
Because if he lives there, he needs to earn enough that he can possibly purchase another property, rent it out, so that when the day comes, when he retires, he's not left high and dry.
Yeah. And it's so true, isn't it? There's so many pastors I know who are coming to the end of their life in ministry that are either leaving a manse without a property or haven't invested in a property early enough to now, get the benefit from it and be able to go, okay, we're going to be okay for the next 20 years, however long they live. So it is a challenging, and I know speaking to some churches in London who have sold manses to raise money for the church. And now in a situation where, if you're in London, it's harder to, again, call someone into ministry and pay them what they need to live in that area. And so the different areas affect the different way this approach is. So it gets more complicated, doesn't it, as well?
I mean, I understand the principle of the manse, and there's a great principle behind it. That if you're calling a man into ministry or somebody's coming into the church to pastor it, my daughter lives in Oxford, and I mean, you've got to earn a huge amount just to get the smallest flat in Oxford. So if you've got a manse, say for instance in Oxford, then that's wonderful. It means you can call someone, put them in there, and they can be there and serve. That's fine. But at the same time, you've got to think about this person's future. And where you and I, who own properties, the property values going up, which will help us in the future. Hopefully you can pay off your mortgage, and then by the time you do retire, I'm an old man now, so I'm thinking this way, 65 next month. When you do retire, you're not paying out rent or whatever. But there are people who have lived in manses and no one's considered this properly, who end up moving in with their kids. It's in their mid-60s and 70s. So the plea really is, it's wonderful if you want to keep a manse, but if you're going to keep it, don't consider that significantly part of the salary. Ensure that person is also able to purchase another property that will set them up for the future.
It's so true.
And give them a pension.
and these are hard to have conversations, aren't they? So about, and we know situations where people have been in the manse where they haven't really been paid enough to live on, and then they try and make it work, and eventually the relationship breaks down.
It does.
Within the eldership that just causes real difficulties in the church. And those conversations don't even tend to happen even.
And no, I mean, I know situations I've been involved just last year, and you have as well, where there's such a breakdown that, the elders and the pastor aren't even talking to each other. And it's because, it feels like a lack of care. It's confusion, and the elders are doing the best they can. They're trying to figure it out. The pastor's doing the best he can. But it just hits such a place because it becomes very, very subjective. So moving from the subjective to the objective, what would it look like? The size of this church, the area in which we live, the responsibilities that you're doing, the time that you're working. How can we determine what will be fair and right, and from there have a clarity for the future of what this would look like? And that's what we've tried to do here, make some changes.
And we'll get into that a little bit more. And I think this is, when I chat to a lot of leaders about this whole area, it's so challenging because the number of hours that people work when you're shepherding a church, you're working on Saturday sometimes in order to prep for Sunday. Sunday, is that a work day? Is that not a work day? You have all these complications where it's not a straightforward 9 to 5,
No, it isn't.
like other people do. You get called on in the evening, you get called into crisis, you're on call all the time. And so if you think about it purely as a job that's 40 hours a week,
No, you can't do that.
it isn't going to work, is it? And so even if we were to work out your rate of pay for the number of hours that you do, it would be crazy, because you're doing way more hours than would be typically, other people would typically do. And so this whole thing gets complicated.
It's incredibly complicated, because it isn't. I mean, if you were to say, I know some trustees or diaconates that ask their pastor to fill out a work form for what they've done through the week. What hours did you do what? What hours did you do?
Yeah.
That's utter madness.
Yeah.
Part of the job is meditating. Part of the job is praying. Part of the job is thinking. You don't tick off when you start doing that, when you stop. So there are weeks where it's just full on all week, and there are other weeks where it's very quiet, and I'm able to sit and read and do stuff that just fills my soul, and that's important. So you can't work it out that way.
Yeah. And if you think of it in that kind of this is a job, these are the job description, these are the hours, this is the pay, it doesn't work.
And then you bring in, for those guys who are married, there's also an expectation so often.
I
think we were like this in the past, that no pastor's wife should be working. Because she's needed.
She may be called on for ministry.
So she's just so we're paying two people. One salary.
Effectively,
And she is, and so how many pastors' wives are running the children's ministry, or running the creche, or running
in the office, or something like that?
I mean, it's just or all the other stuff. Our home has been for 40 years a central hub of the church, which is great, and we love that. But for Jan, it's, sweetheart, I said to her on the phone today, said, we've got this pastor and his wife coming around Tuesday night. I trust that's okay. We've got to chat through some things. She said, yeah, fine. That's been her life in the church and outside of the church now. So you bear that in mind as well, that the expectation on a pastor's wife. I remember somebody once said to me, the only qualification for a pastor's wife is that she's married to a pastor.
Yes.
So she shouldn't, and a Christian obviously. The idea that we take you, but we take you both for one salary, that has to be rethought as well.
That really does. And often, when I go to a conference and you're speaking to, you get to chat with a pastor's wife, they're the ones who know this, who feel this, who experience this behind the scenes, who don't see their husbands because they're working all hours for wages that they're thinking, how do we make this work with the kids or at home? And so some support in that as well for pastors' wives so if you're listening to this, I'm sure you can identify with one of these.
Probably.
You must. And so let's take the first category of people coming from a theological college who are going into their first post. What's the advice from that kind of pastor leader? Because we need to encourage both sides. So we need to encourage trustees and lay elders, and we need them to rethink this and review this. But we also need to equip leaders who are going into roles who aren't asking the right questions. Who have gone with a preach with a view. Then they get this offer, and they don't ask any questions, and it's like, yes or no, do I take it? I feel called to ministry, so I take it, trusting that God is going to look after me in this.
Which is wonderful and right. Put that situation. I mean, we've got a lot of other situations where men move from churches or whatever, or have been in churches years and are struggling to figure it out. But in that one scenario, what happens is someone feels called to ministry, possibly has trained, maybe gone to theological college or seminary or whatever. Has the church has contacted the churches to say, we're looking for a pastor. He comes, they say, would you consider coming here? He preaches with a view or something like that. And it's different ways and different things.
They do different things,
Now, what I would say is they're quick to ask him lots of questions, but rarely because he thinks, well, I just want a pastorate and I want to be able to serve this church. And so,
sense of call. I'm going. There's enthusiasm at that point.
And so there's loads of enthusiasm. But if you were going into a secular job, you'd be asking a lot more questions.
Yeah, you would.
What does the package look like? What are these expectations? What kind of a contract will this be? What would it look like down the road? So many questions, which I've been talking to a theological college, some of my friends who are involved in one, saying, please let me talk to your guys before they go out.
Yeah.
And here's the questions they need to be asking. Yes. And ideally, don't do that on your own.
Yeah.
Bring in a few other experienced folk who can ask the questions on your behalf and work some things out so that it can be clear and objective, and we know what this is going to look like, particularly when you talk about salaries. What is that going to look like? Rather than they go in there and they go, okay, well, let's see what we've got. And it'll depend on the church finances. Okay.
Yeah. It's so true. And their understanding of the expectation of the hours, the understanding of the pension. When is there going to be a review point? That I'm signing up to say, okay, for 2 years, let's agree to do this, but there's a review. Who's the person who's going to think about this ahead of time? All those questions that sometimes just don't get asked. And that is helpful. So that's the easy part, isn't it? To say, leaders, come on, as you go into it, think about all these things. And you're right. If you've got some external help, colleges should be helping. Experienced pastors, draw somebody in, say, how do I approach this? What should I be asking?
Would you come with me and talk?
Let's work that through. And doing that a little bit in community does help. On the other side, then, for lay elders and trustees who are setting these salaries, who are trying to come up with a system, and it'd be good to talk about what you've done in that as well. How can they apply what you're saying here?
Well, I think what they've got to do is look at that role, whether it's a single person or a few people, look at whatever roles, if you've got some part-time or full-time, people in ministry in the church, and then make it far more objective, like I've said. So this is where we had it. In the past, the trustees set the salaries. But it depended on the trustees. As I said, some trustees, I think, would have given too much. Others would have given far too little. The latter would normally be the case.
More the case,
This idea of, well, they have to live by faith, as if you don't. Well, why don't you give up half of your salary and live by faith?
Give it away.
So you're dealing with that sense of it can't be left to the subjective sense of that. So what we did, and we used to have that, and we said this is no good. This has got to be far more objective, of which the church could agree to. And that's the way it is. So what we looked at is what is the closest thing to this? Well, there isn't. But we looked at the teaching profession. It's teaching. It's also caring in many ways. It's outside of just the normal standard working hours that you're doing. We said let's look at the teaching profession. Every year, the National Union of Teachers and everybody else puts out a standard salaries. This is what we pay, depending on what level you are, depending on how long you've worked there, depending on what role you're doing. So what we did is we took that, and then we looked at every role within the church. Those who are on the leadership scale, how long they've been doing it, what that looks like, the size of the church, as they would with that, the size of the school, the size of the church, therefore the responsibilities. And then we decided, okay, we will go with a recommendation of the NUT for each year for the person that is on that level. Now, if that person's role changes, we change the level. Because we can say, you are clearly taking on far more responsibility than you were. So you're no longer just on the teacher scale, we need to put you on the leadership scale. we decided to do that, and then we said we'd drop 15%.
Yeah.
We don't get the huge amount of pension, but we
Yeah.
get some pension
Yeah.
towards it. And we don't get the holidays in the same
Yeah.
way, but we get some holidays. But we were able to make that very objective. I'm not saying that's the only way to do it. It's just the way we've done it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And therefore, we were able to go to the church at a church meeting and say, this is how we're setting the salaries.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's not right that you should, everybody in the church, we want to know exactly how much. That's not fair. But this is the principle and the premise upon which we are paying those who are in ministry and working with us.
Yeah.
And the church thought, this is good. This is right. We set it in place, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago now, something like that.
Yeah, probably longer.
Is
Yeah, it's
it?
probably more
Probably
like 8
is.
years. Yeah.
And it's worked well.
Yeah.
And it's worked well. And then the trustees, the only responsibility the trustees have
Yeah.
is to determine whether somebody's level should change.
Yeah. Yeah.
And therefore, the team or the trustees can
Yeah.
ask questions and say, are you doing far less? Are you doing far more?
Yeah.
Have your responsibilities changed?
Yes.
We think, therefore, you should be on this level and not this. And then it's all out there. Okay, here's a recommendation. We've decided to drop it 15%, but you don't have to do that. But we thought that was fair and right.
Yeah.
And then we'll put some pension in.
That
and
drop
that's the
of
way we've done
15%
it.
is just recognising that there is a difference between a charity and
Yeah, for us it was,
school.
well,
It was
we
that seems right to us.
just,
doesn't
well,
it?
the government's got no money, but we don't have the cash. And so it wasn't just a matter of, well, they get this, we should get it. We just thought there's something honourable and right in there.
Yeah.
And we do trust God.
Yeah.
And so it's worked for us.
Yeah.
Nobody's making huge amounts of money, but nobody's going desperately without.
Yeah. Yeah. And the ability for people to, it's contributed, isn't it, to the length of service that people have had. So, I've been here 21 years, Bob's been here 18, Lewis is here 15, people are not looking and going, oh, right, okay, there's a better deal down the road.
Yeah.
I'm going to head down there and I can get
Excuse me.
more money, more benefits, and, have that. So there is something there, isn't there, about longevity and
Which is
people
vital.
experiencing care.
Which is vital. Churches don't thrive, ultimately, when the pastors and the other people are just coming and going and coming and going, undoing what the last person did, doing something else, moving on. It doesn't create security. It doesn't create a sense of family and community. You want a guy going into a church setting or going on a pastoral team and saying, unless God clearly calls me to something different, which is not just my internal sense alone, it's what do we all think? Unless God calls me to do that, this is it.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah.
But you don't want someone to say, for my family's sake, for my children's sake, for my sanity's sake, I got to move on.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got to move on. And frequently when guys have been bitten in that setting, they don't move on to another pastorate.
Yes.
They move out of it.
Yeah. Some of them have gone into crazy things like, I don't know, speaking at conferences.
That's a biggie.
The kind of positive, motivational speaking, and you're like, what in the world? Because they're good communicators. That's what they've honed their skills.
They hone their skills. That's what they can do,
and
they become coaches and motivators and that kind of thing.
But not even in the church, just in the secular.
And so
it's sad to see.
Where's the gospel?
Yeah,
where's the church? It is desperately sad to see it.
It is. Pete, that's so helpful. And let's cover a little bit about pensions then, because you've talked about the scale, and we've used an objective scale of school, and that's been useful for us. We've reduced it by 15%. But then you're talking about, the need for people to think about pensions, and that is, something that we have seen over decades where leaders haven't had pensions.
Yeah.
And the church hasn't supported people in that way.
Yeah.
And now the law has changed, and there is that need to, but those are low, and
very low.
People don't think about that. Give us some thoughts on how people can approach that in their thinking.
Well, obviously 3%, which is the legal requirement,
Yeah.
that's not going to
Yeah.
help anybody in any way. So it's thinking down the road, what would it look like to ensure that when this person reaches an age where, I've done 40 years now. I'm not retiring at the moment, but at some point I will.
Yeah.
I'll still be serving as best I can.
Yeah.
But we need to be thinking down the road for folk, and it goes quickly.
Yeah,
I was 35 when we started this church, and I've been doing 10 years pastoring before that.
Yeah.
So it's gone, and here I am, granddad.
Yeah.
So we need to put that in place. I don't think it's for us to say this is what a pension should be.
Yeah.
But I think it's something that the trustees, deacons, or whomever determine this should seriously consider.
Yeah.
What was it like for them, for instance, in their company? How much did their company put in towards their pension?
Yeah.
Do you think it should be any less? Do you think that you should be just doing the bare minimum?
Yeah.
So it's just something that hasn't been considered really.
Yeah.
And it needs to be considered far more.
Yeah. And there's a direct link here, where pastor will stay longer in a post than they probably should do because they can't afford not to.
Yeah.
And so transitioning to the next generation, being able to do that, it stifles all of that. And then the church, suffers because there's a leader who's really tired, who's been doing it for a long time. The impact of pastoral ministry is evident, and they can't move them on, and they're not prepared to leave because they can't financially do that.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot, doesn't it?
All the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm 65 next month, or the month after. I forget when. That's what happens. March. I'm 65.
That's what happens.
I've been doing this 40 years. The last decade or so, I've been able to put some money aside for pension. I can't afford to retire at the moment. Now, nobody's asking me to.
Yeah.
My role is changing.
Yeah.
And that's great. But I can't afford to retire. Now, I can afford, as we've discussed, to drop my salary, which releases more cash for others, which is great.
Yeah.
But I couldn't just stop. If I stopped today, I'd have to go and work in Tesco's. Or find a job somewhere.
Absolutely right.
Because now, if I'd had pension from the beginning, I probably could.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not wanting to. You're not wanting me to. But I'm in that situation.
Yeah.
And I'm looked after.
Yeah.
And nobody's asking me to go. And we're of a size of a church where there is many things that I can do within it and step back and do outside of it.
Yeah.
But most guys aren't in that situation. Churches maybe can only afford one or two people.
Yeah.
And so this guy is hanging in there because no one really thought, by the time he reaches this age, we need to have provided enough for him.
Yes.
And if they haven't, here's the other thing. If they haven't, should they say, well, we haven't provided enough pension, but here's what we're going to do for the rest of your life. We're going to put this much money into you.
Yeah. I've seen churches do that.
I've seen churches do that as well. Or others have said, we're talking to one at the moment, we're selling the manse.
Yeah.
We're going to make $500,000 on the manse because it's paid off or whatever. We're selling the manse. We're going to invest some of that into the church because we don't need it. And for the pastors, we're going to give them a decent salary so they can buy their own home and release that and put plenty into pension.
Yeah.
And some of them are saying, well, they've been living in this manse for, say, 20 years. We're selling the manse. We've made £400,000 on this.
Yeah.
The pastor's made nothing. Should we consider part of that that we give him or puts aside for his pension in the future? There's lots of different ways of doing it and thinking it through, rather than the church saying, hey, haven't we got all this money? And this guy's not been able to do that.
No, it's so true. And I've known churches who have given, have literally felt guilty because they haven't done a pension, go, right, well, we're going to commit to give you this amount of money for the next 15 years.
Yes.
But that ties up the next person coming in as well.
It does. So there's
this, if we can get this right, at the beginning,
You won't have to do it then.
you don't have to do it then.
No,
and sometimes it is right to support that pastor for a long term, because they haven't done it for, people have been in ministry 40, 45 years.
Yeah.
They need that help, and that's so important. So each situation is different, but part of this podcast is going, please pause for a second and go, what's our context like? How are we doing in this area? What should we think about doing differently?
I would love for this to, in some ways, because it's mainly pastors. A lot of pastors will look at this, as well as administrators or church managers or whatever. I would love the pastors to look at this and say to their trustees, because we can say things that they may not be able to. Say to the trustees, would you at least take a watch of this?
Yeah.
And then we can sit and have a discussion about it.
Yeah.
And put it in place. I'm not complaining, I'm not going, I'm not kicking off.
Yes.
But I really like to be able to discuss these issues of remuneration, of pension, of all this kind of stuff, expectations. Those are the things that need to be put in place. If you can do it early on, you don't end up in a situation where the church is continuing to put money into someone who's no longer serving because they didn't in the past. You want to be able to put that in place there and then. So when a church is considering whether we can afford a pastor or two pastors or somebody else, we've got a pastor, we want to take somebody else on, they must consider the whole thing.
Yes.
You can't say, well, look, we got 25 grand and I think we can get someone for that. Well, hang on a minute. You've got that, but you've got all the other things that come with it. And so you've got to look at that in a good way, and an important way that you can cover everything. And if you can't, it's best not to take someone at least full time in that.
You've got to rework it then. You do. And this sent us into conversations that we've had in the past, and we have with lots of churches, is because they're not running a regular budget, that they're not thinking about this year on year. It's surprising how many churches don't have a budget. And then, part of hiring staff is, right, well, if we could raise all the money for that person for the year, then we can employ them. And you're like, this is, I appreciate the opportunity for the church to give, to bring someone in a faith to do that and give towards their wage. But if they'd done the work on the budget and looked to that over a 3-year period, they go, we can afford to do this, and we can make this work in the right way. But so there's so many things that feed into this that you're like,
there is,
get these things right.
There is. So, situation that comes up time and time again. You may have a single pastor and folk in the church saying, look, we need somebody else. We need somebody to work with you. So you're carrying all the ministry. Your wife's doing the kids' work or the teens. And we need somebody else in there, and we want to reach out. It's always, we want to reach out. As if getting a guy in is suddenly going to make you reach out. It doesn't work like that. It's the church that do that. So what they do is they take up a special offering. So we take up a special offering, and we take up our 25,000 or whatever, and we go and we say, hey, we've got a number 2 job here for someone, and in you come. And then we'll assess them through the year, and maybe next year take up take up a special offering for someone coming into that. Budget, plan. If people are able to give them a special offering, encourage them to give regularly into that. Just like Paul would. Put some aside, put this in there, so that if you're taking someone on, you're not saying, well, we hope to be able to employ you next year. Just like in a contract. Say, no, we believe God's calling you to be part of us, and we believe this is right, and we're looking long term. Therefore, we budgeted for it long term.
Absolutely right. Let me add one more point on there before we finish as well, because we've had to rethink this as well, haven't we, in terms of internships, in terms of trainees. People got that sense of calling. They're in the early stages of what they might be thinking about doing in the future, into going into ministry. Has your perspective changed on that? Because often churches will not pay anything towards interns, or interns have to raise their own money. And give a little bit of thought on that, because that could be something that someone's going, oh, that's a question for us.
I mean, that's All right, this may not be popular.
Okay. All right.
I think it's fine for people to volunteer. And I think if someone's volunteering, then they're volunteering.
Like a gap year student, something like that. Yeah.
They're gaining from it. They're learning from it.
Yeah.
They're volunteering. We're not asking them to carry any importance in their job or in their role. We really are giving them a chance to train and learn.
Yeah. The expectations are clear, aren't they, on that? Yeah.
But as an intern,
Yeah.
then you're taking someone on and you're giving them some responsibility. You're expecting something from them.
Yeah.
Rather than just them watching.
Yeah.
You're expecting them to carry different weights and do on different tasks. That person should be paid.
Yeah.
And that person shouldn't be paid through contacting their friends. I abhor it.
Yeah.
Because this is the reason. So my one of my daughters is a nurse. She's a pediatric advanced practitioner or something. And she wanted to do that. She felt the calling of God to do that. She had to save up money. We had to save up money for her to be able to go through college, for her to be able to do all the courses. It is no less a calling for her to do that than somebody saying, I want to go on the mission field or I want to do an internship. So the idea of approaching people saying, I'd like to do this internship. Will you give me your money to do it?
Yeah.
Well, why shouldn't everybody do that in their job? Because whatever we do to the glory of God.
Yeah.
You know, whatever you may be doing. My son's saying I'm an architect. Would you? I feel God's calling me to build things. Would you give me money? Or my other daughter is a academic, a lawyer. You know, would you put me through all of this? So there's this idea that if it's in the church, then everybody should pay in for it because it's something special. Everything is special if it's done to the glory of God. And therefore, I don't make any difference. So I don't think that person should be put in a situation where they're asking people for money to support them. Whereas I think it makes a statement that this is more important, more godly, and more Christ-like to be in this than it is to be in nursing. I disagree with that. That's a theological premise.
I agree. And there's a difference, isn't there, from calling the church to say, you know, we would love to take this person on an internship. We see there's potential here. Would you consider giving to support this, person, rather than the individual then having to now feel the pressure that they've got to raise the funds to do this, and they start calling on all their friends and all the different things. And we've started to see, I think, that change a little bit. But again, it's the responsibility of the church. If you think God's called you to do this, how can you budget to raise the money to bring this person on and to make sure that we are paying them for the hours that they're doing? And there's a difference between a gap year and an internship, and those words get switched around.
And we need to be careful.
So
if somebody is saying, I want to volunteer for a year, we're not looking to pay, and we're not looking, we have no expectations on them. And if they're, say mum and dad and Uncle Bert want to put some money into them so they can do it for free, that's great. If some friends want to do it. But that person then going online, setting up their Just Giving page because I'm doing this and I'm so important. No, you're not. And you just want to volunteer for a year. So this putting it out there, this expectation. So I get emails, and you probably have as well, from people, oh, I want to do this for the Lord.
So I'm going on the mission field.
Would you give me some money? Well, everybody's doing what they're doing for the Lord. You're working in Wicks for the Lord. You're on the till in Tesco's for the Lord. It's all the same.
Yeah, that's true. And I think this also, let's finish here then on as churches begin to hire other people in administration, building, cleaning, there are places that you can go for some benchmarking on what others are doing. And again, it's an objective thing to say, right, okay, what are schools doing with some of their staff that go behind the scenes?
How much do they pay the caretaker? How much do they pay the
receptionists and things like that? So there are places you can do, and we'd encourage the trustees and those lay elders who are involved in this, people who are responsible for this, to get some help from outside, find out what other people are doing. And leaders don't tend to talk to one another about this. It's kind of they don't tend to. It's just
It's a taboo subject.
It's a taboo subject. That's it.
Yeah.
And that's really unhelpful. And if you're in a situation you're thinking, I could do with a conversation on this, or I could do with our elders and trustees listening to this conversation, please pass it on. Please get in touch. Questions at thechurchoffice.co.uk. We would love to hear from you, and if we can somehow serve you or signpost you, or you can get a conversation with Pete that just shares a little bit about, in more in depth, this is how we approach it, then please do get in contact. Mate, thank you so much for your time, and I hope we've done it justice in everything that you wanted to say, and I appreciate you coming and saying, I think this is a need.
It is.
This is a need, and let's talk about it on the podcast. Yeah. And I think if you're listening to this as a church manager, stop for a minute and say, how can I serve my pastor? Are there changes that you can make in the budget that can allow for somebody to get some additional training, to have a staff review, to have a wage review? Is there anything that you could do that could serve, that could prompt a review that needs to come earlier? Maybe there's some help that you can do in terms of contracts, that making sure that our elders, that our ministers, the people who we're employing, are getting the proper checks and balances, are getting the proper support that they need. So maybe ask your pastor how he's doing in this whole area.
Yeah.
That's just a great starting point, isn't it?
Yeah.
How are you doing financially?
And that's what I do. I'm around with pastors, and it's uncomfortable, but so I ask them. Yeah. When I'm trying to serve them, say to them, so how are you doing financially? What does it look like? What have you got in place? What's your pension looking like? How are you thinking about the future? Are you content and happy? Do you feel it's going well? Is there anything I can help you with? And it's like, well,
no one's ever asked me.
No one's asked me. And, you better talk to my wife because she's crying all the time. So.
This is the one conversation she constantly has with me. And that is the thing. When was the last time you took a holiday and you went maybe even abroad or something like that? Because these things are so important. So please, thank you for listening to this today. Please go away. If we can serve you in some way, please get in touch. We'd love to be able to do that. So thank you for listening to the podcast. Please keep an eye out for lots of different guests that are coming through the year. We'd love to hear your ideas. If there's something that you think, right, please follow up on this. We'd love to hear your feedback and help to grow this even more. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.